wagon wheel cracked against a frozen rut in the road, and Nora Fletcher tumbled into the snow with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child growing in her belly. She watched through tears as her father's wagon disappeared around the bend, carrying away the only life she had ever known, leaving her alone on a desolate stretch of road 20 miles outside Panamint, California, in the bitter January of 1883. The cold bit through her thin cotton dress immediately. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently as the wind whipped across the barren landscape. The Sierra Nevada mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks white with snow that seemed to mock her desperate situation. She was 4 months pregnant, unmarried, and her father had made his judgment clear. There would be no forgiveness, no shelter, no family to return to. The man who had promised to marry her had vanished the moment she told him about the baby, leaving her to face the consequences alone. She forced herself to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, a ribbon of frozen mud and ice cutting through the harsh winter landscape. Behind her lay the farm where she had been raised, the home that would never welcome her again. Ahead lay Panamint, a mining town she had visited only twice in her life, filled with strangers who would surely judge her just as harshly as her own father had. But she had no choice. She began to walk. Each step was agony. Her thin shoes, meant for indoor work, offered no protection against the frozen ground. Her fingers had gone numb within minutes, and she tucked them under her arms, trying desperately to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. The sun hung low in the winter sky, offering light but no heat, and Nora knew with sickening certainty that she would not survive the night if she did not find shelter soon. An hour passed, then 2. Her feet moved mechanically, one in front of the other, though she could no longer feel them. She stumbled often now, catching herself at the last moment, driven forward by nothing but pure survival instinct. The baby inside her was still too small to feel, but she thought of it constantly. This tiny life that depended entirely on her ability to keep moving. The sound of hoofbeats behind her barely registered at first. When she finally turned, dizzy and disoriented, she saw a rider approaching on a sturdy bay horse, leading a pack mule behind him. The man sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders wrapped in a thick sheepskin coat, his hat pulled low against the wind. Nora tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. She raised one trembling hand instead, a pitiful gesture of desperation that was all she could manage. The rider had already seen her, though, and was urging his horse into a faster trot. He reached her just as her legs gave out completely. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself looking up into a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of dark honey that held genuine concern. "Jesus Christ, woman," he said, his voice deep and rough with alarm. "What are you doing out here alone?" She tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering so violently that no words would come. He did not wait for an explanation. In one smooth motion, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his horse. He settled her in the saddle first, then swung up behind her, wrapping his thick coat around both of them. The warmth of his body against her back was overwhelming, and Nora sagged against him, too exhausted to care about propriety. "There's a line shack about 3 miles ahead," he said, gathering the reins with one hand while keeping the other arm firmly around her waist. "Can you hold on that long?" She managed a small nod. He made a clicking sound with his tongue, and the horse began moving at a steady pace that ate up the frozen ground. The pack mule followed obediently behind. "Name's Yates Crawford," he said after a few minutes. "I run cattle in the foothills, been up checking the winter pastures. What's your name?" "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Fletcher." "Well, Miss Fletcher, you picked a hell of a day for a walk. Mind telling me why you're out here dressed for a summer picnic?" The kindness in his voice, so unexpected after the harsh condemnation of her father, broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her frozen cheeks. "I have nowhere else to go." He did not press for more information, for which she was grateful. They rode in silence, and gradually, wrapped in his coat and warmed by his body, Nora stopped shivering quite so violently. She became aware of other details now, the sure way he handled the horse, the faint smell of leather and pine that clung to his clothes, the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. The line shack appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was a small, rough structure made of weathered timber, but to Nora it looked like salvation. Yates dismounted first, then reached up to lift her down. Her legs would not support her weight, and he carried her again, kicking the door open with his boot. The interior was sparse but clean. A single room with a pot-belly stove, a narrow cot, a rough table and 2 chairs, and supplies stacked neatly on shelves along one wall. Yates set her on the cot, wrapping the thin blanket around her shoulders, then moved immediately to the stove. Within minutes, he had a fire blazing, and warmth began to creep through the small space. He filled a tin cup with water from his canteen and held it to her lips. "Drink slowly," he instructed. The water was cold but clean, and Nora sipped gratefully. When she had finished, he set the cup aside and knelt in front of her, carefully removing her ruined shoes. His expression darkened when he saw her feet, red and swollen with the beginnings of frostbite. "This is bad," he said quietly, "but not as bad as it could be. You were maybe an hour away from losing toes." He filled a basin with water from a barrel in the corner, testing the temperature carefully before placing her feet in it. The sensation was excruciating, and Nora bit her lip to keep from crying out. "I know it hurts," Yates said, his voice gentle, "but we need to warm them slowly. Can you be brave a little longer?" She nodded, gripping the edge of the cot with white knuckles. He stayed kneeling beside her, one hand resting lightly on her ankle, his presence somehow making the pain more bearable. When the water had done its work and her feet had regained some color, he dried them carefully with a clean cloth and wrapped them in strips of flannel. "Now," he said, settling into one of the chairs and studying her with those disconcerting honey-colored eyes. "Do you want to tell me what really happened?" Nora looked down at her hands folded in her lap over the slight swell of her belly that was not yet visible beneath her dress. She had nothing left to lose now. No reputation to preserve. No family to shame further. The truth, ugly as it was, seemed a small price to pay for the warmth and safety this stranger had already given her. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. "Unmarried. My father cast me out this morning. He drove me 20 miles from our farm and told me never to return." She waited for the disgust, the judgment, the cold dismissal. Instead, Yates simply nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And the father of the child?" "Gone. He promised to marry me, but when I told him about the baby, he left town. No one knows where he went." Her voice cracked on the last words. "My father said I had brought shame on the family, that I was dead to him." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though chewing over something difficult. Finally, he stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down supplies. "Well," he said, his back to her as he worked, "your father's a goddamn fool, begging your pardon for the language. Any man who'd turn out his daughter in the middle of winter, pregnant or not, is no man at all in my book." The casual acceptance in his voice made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. He set a tin plate on the table and began preparing food, cutting thick slices from a loaf of bread, opening a can of beans, slicing salt pork. The smell made Nora's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. He cooked the simple meal on the stove, and when it was ready, he brought her a plate piled high with food. "Eat," he ordered gently. "All of it. You need your strength." Nora ate ravenously, barely tasting the food in her haste to fill the aching void in her stomach. Yates ate his own meal more slowly, watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. When she had finished every scrap, he took the plate and refilled it. She ate that too, though more slowly this time, and finally felt the gnawing hunger begin to ease. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." Yates shook his head. No repayment needed. It is what any decent person would do. He paused, then added, though I will say not many folks around here are going to be as understanding about your situation as I am. Panamint can be a hard town, especially for a woman alone. I know. Nora pulled the blanket tighter around herself. But I have nowhere else to go. I thought perhaps I could find work there, cleaning or cooking, something to earn enough to survive until the baby comes. And after the baby comes? She had no answer for that. She had been trying not to think beyond the immediate crisis of survival. Yates seemed to understand her silence. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. I have a proposition for you, he said slowly, as though working through the idea even as he spoke it. Hear me out before you answer. He turned to face her. My ranch is about 15 miles from here, in the foothills. It is not much, just a small operation, 100 head of cattle and some horses. I do most of the work myself, but I have been thinking I could use some help around the place, cooking, mending, keeping the house in order, things I do not have much time or talent for. Nora's heart began to beat faster. You are offering me work? More than that. He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. If you came to work for me as just a pregnant, unmarried woman, the gossips would tear you apart. They would make your life hell, and mine too for harboring you. But if you came as my wife, that would be different. The word hung in the air between them. Nora stared at him, certain she had misheard. Your wife? In name only, Yates clarified quickly. I am not proposing a real marriage, just the legal appearance of one. We could say we married quietly in Sacramento or San Francisco, that you are expecting our child. No one needs to know the truth. You would have a home, protection, a name for your baby. In return, you would help with the housework and cooking. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Why would you do that? Nora asked, her voice barely audible. You do not know me. You owe me nothing. Yates was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I had a sister once, he said finally. Sarah. She found herself in a situation similar to yours. The man who got her pregnant refused to marry her, and our father, he was a hard man, very religious. He turned her out just like your father did to you. She was 17. His jaw tightened. I was working a cattle drive in Texas when it happened. By the time I got home, she was dead. She tried to make it to our aunt's house in Sacramento, but she never arrived. They found her body in a ravine 3 months later. I am so sorry, Nora whispered. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help another woman in that situation, I would. He met her eyes directly. I cannot bring Sarah back, but maybe I can keep you and your baby alive. That would mean something. Nora's mind raced. The offer was extraordinary, generous beyond anything she could have hoped for. But it was also strange, unprecedented. To marry a complete stranger, even in name only, was a tremendous risk. Yet what choice did she have? The alternative was to try her luck in Panamint, where she would face scorn and judgment at every turn, where she would likely starve before she found anyone willing to employ a pregnant, unmarried woman. You would do this for a stranger? She asked. Take on the responsibility of another man's child? The child did not ask to be born into this situation, Yates said. Seems to me the baby deserves a fair start in life, regardless of the circumstances. He pushed away from the wall. I will not pressure you. If you want to go to Panamint and try your luck there, I will take you tomorrow and give you enough money for a week's lodging. But if you want the safety and security I am offering, it is yours. No strings attached. Nora looked down at her hands again, at the slight curve of her belly. She thought of the child growing inside her, innocent and helpless. She thought of the long, cold winter ahead, of the judgment and cruelty she would face alone. And she thought of this man, Yates Crawford, who had stopped to help her when he could have ridden past, who had shared his warmth and food, and offered her a lifeline she had never expected. If we did this, she said carefully, what would you expect from me? Beyond the housework, I mean. Nothing, Yates said firmly. You would have your own room, your privacy. I would not touch you, would not make demands. This would be strictly practical, a way to give you and your child protection. When the baby comes, we will figure out the next steps together. If you wanted to leave after that to make your own way, I would not stop you. But you would always have a place to come back to if you needed it. His sincerity was unmistakable. Nora found herself believing him, trusting him in a way that surprised her. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was something in his steady gaze and calm demeanor that spoke of genuine decency. "All right," she said softly. "I accept your offer. I will marry you." Yates nodded, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "Then we had better get our story straight before we reach the ranch. How far along are you?" 4 months. "And when was the last time anyone saw you who might know otherwise?" "My family kept to ourselves. We rarely went to town. The last time I was in Panamint was 6 months ago." "Good. Then we will say we met in Panamint 7 months ago, courted quietly, and married 4 months back in Sacramento. You have been living with me at the ranch since then. My nearest neighbor is old Tom Morrison, 5 miles away. He minds his own business mostly. As long as our story is consistent, no one will question it." They spent the next hour working through the details, creating a believable history for their fictional courtship and marriage. Yates was surprisingly thorough, asking questions Nora had not thought of, ensuring their story had no obvious holes. By the time they finished, Nora felt reasonably confident they could maintain the deception. "You should rest now," Yates said, standing and stretching. "We have a long ride tomorrow. I will take the floor." "I cannot take your bed," Nora protested. "You saved my life. The least I can do is sleep on the floor." "You are pregnant and recovering from exposure," Yates said firmly. "You get the cot. I have slept in worse places, believe me." He pulled a bedroll from the supplies and spread it near the stove. "Try to sleep. Morning comes early." Nora lay down on the narrow cot, pulling the thin blanket over herself. The fire crackled in the stove, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. She watched Yates settle onto his bedroll, his back to her, giving her what privacy the small space allowed. Her mind was spinning with everything that had happened, the catastrophic collapse of her old life and the strange, unexpected beginning of this new one. "Yates?" she said quietly into the darkness. "Yes? Thank you for everything. I will try to be a good wife, even if it is only in name." There was a pause. Then his voice came, low and warm. "Get some sleep, Nora Fletcher. Or I guess I should say, Nora Crawford. Tomorrow you start a new life." She closed her eyes, and despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and grief of all she had lost, she felt something she had not expected to feel again. Hope. Morning came with pale winter light filtering through the single window. Nora woke to find Yates already up, the fire stoked and breakfast cooking. Her feet still ached, but the swelling had gone down, and when she stood carefully, she found she could walk. Yates had set out a pair of thick wool socks and boots that were far too large for her, but he stuffed the toes with cloth until they fit well enough. "They were Sarah's," he said quietly. "I kept some of her things. I am glad they can be useful now." The gesture touched her deeply. They ate a quick breakfast of coffee and fried cornmeal mush. Then Yates packed up the supplies and saddled his horse. He lifted Nora up first, then settled behind her as he had the day before. The pack mule was loaded and ready, and they set out as the sun climbed higher in the winter sky. The ride to the ranch took most of the day. They stopped once at midday to rest the animals and eat a cold lunch. Yates pointed out landmarks as they rode, explaining the lay of the land, where his property began and ended, where the best water sources were. Nora listened carefully, trying to memorize it all, trying to learn this new world she was entering. The ranch came into view in the late afternoon, and Nora felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. It was indeed small, as Yates had said. A modest 2-room cabin sat in a sheltered valley with a barn and several smaller outbuildings nearby. A creek ran along the northern edge of the property, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. The land itself was beautiful, rolling hills covered in winter grass with mountains rising dramatically in the background. "It is not much," Yates said, and she heard a note of uncertainty in his voice, as though worried she might be disappointed. "But it is solid, and the land is good. The cabin stays warm in winter and cool in summer. There is plenty of water year-round." "It is wonderful," Nora said honestly. Compared to where she had been just yesterday, freezing and abandoned on a desolate road, this looked like paradise. Yates brought the horse to a stop in front of the cabin and helped her down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Come on, let me show you inside." The cabin was indeed small but well-maintained. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room combined, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Simple furniture filled the space. A table and chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves stocked with supplies. Everything was neat but had the slightly neglected air of a place kept by someone who did not much care about domestic comforts. "That is the bedroom," Yates said, gesturing to a door on the far wall. "You will take it. I will sleep out here on the cot." He crossed to open another door, revealing a small room barely large enough for a single narrow bed. "This was going to be a storage room, but I never got around to finishing it. It will do for me." Nora walked into the bedroom and found a larger space with a proper bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. The bed was made with military precision, the corners tight, a heavy quilt folded at the foot. It was a man's room, spare and functional, but it would be hers now. "You can change things however you like," Yates said from the doorway. "Make it comfortable. I will bring in Sarah's trunk. There are clothes and things that might be useful." Over the next hour, they unloaded the mule and settled the animals in the barn. Yates carried in the heavy trunk and set it at the foot of the bed, then left her alone to explore. Nora opened it carefully, feeling like she was intruding on something sacred. Inside were dresses, underthings, a good wool coat, a pair of sturdy boots that looked like they would actually fit. There was also a packet of letters tied with ribbon, a cameo brooch, and a small Bible with a worn leather cover. She ran her fingers over the clothes, feeling the quality of the fabric. These were well-made garments, cared for lovingly. Sarah Crawford had been real, had lived, and hoped, and died far too young. Nora felt the weight of that loss, the tragedy of it. She made a silent promise to the girl whose things she was inheriting. "I will not waste this chance. I will make something good from this life you helped give me." That evening, Nora insisted on cooking dinner. Yates had been reluctant to let her do too much, worried she was not yet recovered, but she needed to start earning her keep. She found the kitchen supplies well stocked, if somewhat disorganized, and set about making a proper meal. Beans and salt pork again, but she made cornbread to go with it and found a jar of preserved peaches on one of the shelves. They ate at the rough table, and Nora saw Yates's surprise at the improvement in the food. "This is good," he said, "better than anything I've managed in a long time." "It is just simple fare," Nora said. "But if you have supplies, I can do better. I am a good cook. My mother taught me." A shadow crossed her face at the mention of her mother, and Yates noticed. "Does your mother know what your father did?" "She was there when he cast me out," Nora said quietly. She cried, but she did not try to stop him. She never went against his word. "I'm sorry. So am I." She looked down at her plate. "I thought perhaps she might defend me, might argue for mercy, but I suppose I understand. She has 6 other children to think of, a home to maintain. I was a problem that needed to be eliminated." Yates reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a brief, warm touch that was gone almost before she registered it. "You are not a problem. You are a person who made a mistake, same as all of us do. The difference is you got caught holding the consequences." His words, simple as they were, eased something tight in her chest. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and afterward Nora cleaned up while Yates went to check on the animals one last time before bed. When he returned, she was heating water for washing. "There is a bathing tub in the barn," he said. "I can bring it in if you want a proper bath." The thought of hot water and soap was almost overwhelmingly appealing. Yates hauled in the large tin tub and filled it with water heated on the stove. He set it up in her bedroom, then retreated to the main room, closing the door firmly behind him. Nora stripped off her clothes and sank into the hot water with a sigh of pure bliss. She scrubbed away days of grime and fear, washing her hair with the bar of soap she found on the washstand. By the time she climbed out and dried off with the rough towel, she felt almost human again. She dressed in one of Sarah's nightgowns, a soft flannel affair that was a little loose but comfortable, and combed out her long dark hair. When she emerged, she found Yates sitting by the fireplace, working on a piece of leather tack with practiced hands. He looked up and nodded toward the bedroom. "I will empty that in the morning. You should rest now." "Good night, Yates, and thank you again." "Good night, Nora." She climbed into the bed, the first proper bed she had slept in since her father had cast her out. The mattress was stuffed with straw and corn husks, and while it was not soft, it was infinitely better than the frozen ground or the narrow cot in the line shack. She pulled the heavy quilt over herself and closed her eyes, listening to the quiet sounds of Yates moving about in the main room, banking the fire, settling down for the night. In the morning, Nora woke to find Yates already gone. A note on the table informed her that he was checking the cattle in the east pasture and would be back by midday. She set about making breakfast, exploring the supplies more thoroughly. There was flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, some cans of vegetables and fruit, coffee, sugar, and lard, enough to make simple, hearty meals, though she made a mental note to ask about getting more variety. She spent the morning cleaning the cabin thoroughly, scrubbing surfaces that had not seen proper attention in far too long, organizing the kitchen, making the space feel more like a home. It felt good to work, to be useful, to have purpose again. Yates returned just as she was setting lunch on the table. He looked surprised at the transformation in the cabin. "You have been busy." "I could not sit idle," Nora said. "Besides, you are keeping your end of our bargain. I need to keep mine." They fell into a routine over the following days. Yates worked the ranch, riding out early and returning for meals, sometimes staying close to work on repairs to buildings and equipment, sometimes gone for most of the day checking on distant pastures. Nora cooked and cleaned, mended his clothes, organized the household. They were careful with each other, polite and respectful, maintaining the boundaries of their unusual arrangement. But something was shifting, slowly and subtly. Nora found herself watching Yates when he was not aware of it, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way his hands were gentle when he worked with the animals, the way he sometimes hummed tunelessly while doing chores. He had a quiet confidence about him that was deeply reassuring. She felt safe with him in a way she had not felt safe in a long time. Yates, for his part, seemed to appreciate the changes Nora brought to his life. He complimented her cooking regularly, seemed to relax more in the tidy, organized cabin, started staying inside longer in the evenings rather than retreating to the barn. They talked during meals, careful conversations at first, sharing small details about their lives. She learned that he was 26, had been running this ranch for 3 years, had grown up on a larger spread in Nevada before his father's death had forced the family to sell. He learned that she was 22, that she loved to read, though she had few books, that she missed her younger siblings terribly despite everything. 3 weeks after her arrival, Yates came home with supplies from town and news. "I ran into Tom Morrison," he said, unpacking the goods. "Told him about my new wife. He seemed pleased for me, said he looked forward to meeting you properly come spring." "Did he ask questions?" "Just the usual. How we met, how long we had been married. I stuck to our story. He believed it. Why would not he?" Yates paused, then added, "I picked up something for you in town." He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and handed it to her. Nora unwrapped it to find 3 books, 2 novels, and a volume of poetry. Her eyes stung with sudden tears. "You remembered?" "You said you liked to read. Figured you would appreciate something to pass the time." He shifted his weight, looking almost embarrassed. "If you do not like those particular ones, I can trade them next time." "They are perfect," Nora said softly. "Thank you." That night, She read by the fireplace while Yates worked on his tack. It felt domestic and comfortable, like they were a real married couple enjoying a quiet evening. The thought brought a strange ache to her chest, a longing for something she had not realized she wanted. As January faded into February, Nora's pregnancy became more visible. Her dresses, even Sarah's larger ones, began to strain across her middle. Yates noticed and rode to town again, returning with fabric and a pattern. "My mother used to sew," he said. "I thought maybe you could make some things that would fit better. If you do not know how, I can ask one of the women in town to help." "I can sew," Nora assured him. She spent the next several days cutting and stitching, creating loose, comfortable dresses that accommodated her growing belly. Yates watched her work sometimes, his expression thoughtful, and once she caught him staring at her middle with something that looked almost like wonder. "Have you felt the baby move yet?" he asked one evening. "Not yet. It is still early, but soon, I think." "It must be strange," he said, "carrying a life inside you." "It is." She set down her sewing. "Frightening, too. I do not know what kind of mother I will be. I do not know if I'll be any good at it." "You will be fine," Yates said with unexpected certainty. "You have a good heart. That is what matters most." The first time she felt the baby move, it was late February, and she was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table. A tiny flutter, like butterfly wings, low in her belly. She froze, her hands still in the dough, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did, a little stronger this time, and she gasped. Yates looked up from where he was cleaning his rifle. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. The baby just moved. I felt it." He set the rifle aside and crossed to her, his face filled with curious concern. "Does it hurt?" "No, it feels strange, but not bad, like bubbles or butterflies." Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on her belly, low where she had felt the movement. They stood that way for a long moment, his large, warm hand covering the swell of her stomach, both of them waiting. The baby fluttered again, and Yates's eyes widened. "I felt it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I felt the baby move." They looked at each other, and something passed between them, a shared moment of wonder that shifted the ground beneath Nora's feet. She became suddenly intensely aware of how close he was standing, of the warmth of his hand on her body, of the way his eyes had softened as they looked at her. Her breath caught in her throat. Yates must have felt it too, because he stepped back abruptly, dropping his hand. "That is good," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "That the baby is moving, I mean. Shows everything is going well." "Yes," Nora managed. "It is good." The moment passed, but it lingered in the air between them, changing things in ways neither of them acknowledged aloud. Nora went back to her bread, and Yates returned to his rifle. But the easy companionship had shifted into something more complicated, more charged. March brought warmer weather and longer days. The cattle were doing well, and Yates hired a young man named Billy to help with the spring work. Billy was 17, eager and hard-working, and he accepted without question that Nora was Yates's wife. He was respectful and shy around her, calling her Mrs. Crawford and thanking her profusely for every meal she fed him. With Billy's help, Yates had more time in the evenings. He started teaching Nora to ride, using his gentlest mare. At first she was terrified, but he was patient, leading the horse while she found her balance, his hand always ready to steady her. By the end of the month, she could ride well enough to accompany him on short trips around the ranch. She loved seeing the land from horseback, loved the freedom of it, the way the world opened up beyond the confines of the cabin. Yates showed her his favorite places, a meadow where wildflowers would bloom in spring, a high ridge with a view of the whole valley, a quiet pool in the creek where trout gathered. "This is the most beautiful place I've ever been," Nora said one afternoon as they sat on the ridge, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. "I am glad you think so," Yates said. "I built this ranch from nothing. Every fence post, every building I put in with my own hands. It means something having a place that is yours." It must be wonderful to have that certainty, Nora said wistfully, to know where you belong. Yates looked at her, his expression serious. You belong here now, too, for as long as you want. I know our arrangement was temporary, Nora said carefully, but I want you to know I am grateful beyond words. You gave me a life when I had none. I will not forget that. Nora. He said her name like it was important, like it meant something. I want you to understand something. When I offered you this arrangement, I thought I was just doing the decent thing, helping someone in need. But these past months, having you here, it has been good. Better than I expected. You have made this place a home, and I realize I did not know how much I needed that. Her heart was beating fast. What are you saying? I am saying I do not want this to be temporary anymore. I am saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just an arrangement for me. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers rough against her skin. I care about you, Nora, about you and the baby. I want this to be real, if you are willing. Nora felt like all the air had been knocked out of her lungs. She had been fighting her growing feelings for Yates for weeks, telling herself it was just gratitude, just the natural affection born of close quarters and shared routines. But it was more than that, and she knew it. She had fallen in love with this quiet, decent man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. I care about you too, she whispered. I tried not to. I told myself it was not fair to you, that you deserved better than a woman with another man's child. But I cannot help how I feel. Then do not fight it. He cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Let this be real. Be my wife in truth, not just in name. Let me be a father to your child. We can make this work, Nora. I know we can. She searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She found none, only steady certainty and something that looked very much like love. Yes, she said, the word coming out on a breath. Yes, I want that too. He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a promise more than a passion. Nora leaned into him, her hand resting on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as fast as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. We should probably head back, Yates said, though he made no move to stand. It will be dark soon. Let us stay a little longer, Maria, Nora said. I want to remember this moment. They sat together as the sun set, hand in hand, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The baby moved inside Nora, a series of strong kicks that made her laugh. Yates kept his hand on her belly, feeling each movement, his expression full of wonder. I am going to love this child, he said, like it was my own. You know that, right? I know. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You are already more of a father than the real one ever would have been. The ride back to the ranch was slow and peaceful. They put the horses away together, working in comfortable silence, and went inside as full darkness fell. Nora made dinner while Yates lit lamps and stoked the fire. It was all wonderfully, beautifully ordinary, but it felt transformed now, charged with new meaning. After dinner, Yates took her hand and led her to the bedroom. But when she started to feel nervous, he just smiled. I am not going to rush anything, he said. I just want to hold you, if that is all right. I have wanted to for weeks. They lay down together on the bed, fully clothed, and Yates wrapped his arms around her, careful of her belly. Nora rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She felt safe and cherished, and home in a way she had never felt before. Tell me about Sarah, she said softly, if you want to. Yates was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. He told her about his sister, younger by 4 years, with a laugh like music and a talent for gentling horses. He told her about how close they had been, how he had always looked out for her, how devastated he had been when he learned what had happened. His voice was rough with old grief, but there was also love in it, and gratitude that he could share these memories with someone who understood. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "She always wanted me to find someone, to be happy. I think she would be pleased that her things went to someone who needed them, someone I care about." "I hope I can honor her memory," Nora said. "I will try to live the life she did not get to have." "You already are." They fell asleep like that, tangled together. And when Nora woke in the morning, she was alone in bed, but could hear Yates moving around in the kitchen making coffee. She smiled and stretched, feeling the baby kick in response, and got up to start her day. April brought spring in earnest, wildflowers blooming across the hills, new calves being born in the pastures. Nora's belly grew large and round, and Yates became increasingly protective, not wanting her to overwork herself. She humored him, though she felt strong and healthy, glowing with happiness. They had settled into their new relationship with surprising ease. Yates was affectionate, but respectful, understanding that her pregnancy made some things difficult. They kissed often, held hands, shared the bed at night, content with closeness and conversation. It was nothing like Nora's brief, bitter experience with the man who had gotten her pregnant. That had been furtive and shameful, all grabbing hands and broken promises. This was something entirely different, built on trust and genuine affection. In late April, they rode to town together for supplies. It was Nora's first time showing herself in Panamint as Yates's wife, and she was nervous. But Yates kept a steady hand at the small of her back as they walked down the main street, and his calm confidence helped settle her nerves. They stopped at the general store where the proprietor, a round man named Mr. Henderson, greeted Yates warmly. "Crawford, good to see you. And this must be the missus I have heard about." "My wife, Nora," Yates said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "Nora, this is Jim Henderson. He runs the best store in town." "The only store in town," Henderson said with a laugh. He smiled at Nora. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Crawford. Looks like congratulations are in order." He nodded at her belly. "Thank you," Nora said, her hand instinctively moving to rest on the swell. "We are very happy." They made their purchases, and Henderson chatted amiably about town news, cattle prices, the weather. He treated Nora with easy friendliness, and gradually she relaxed. No one questioned her presence or her pregnancy. She was simply Yates Crawford's wife, and that was enough. As they were leaving, a woman approached them on the street. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Yates Crawford, you have been keeping secrets, she said. "I heard you got married, but I did not believe it until I saw it with my own eyes." "Mrs. Morrison," Yates said, returning her smile. "Good to see you. This is my wife, Nora. Nora, this is Helen Morrison. She and her husband Tom are our nearest neighbors." "I am so pleased to meet you," Helen said, taking Nora's hands in her own. "You must come to dinner soon. I have been telling Tom we need to have you both over, make you feel welcome properly." "That would be lovely," Nora said, genuinely warmed by the woman's kindness. They chatted for a few more minutes, then parted ways with promises to arrange a dinner soon. As they rode out of town, Nora felt a sense of relief and hope. The people here had accepted her without question. She was not the fallen woman her father had named her. She was Nora Crawford, wife of Yates Crawford, soon to be mother. She had a place in this community, a reputation to uphold, a future to build. "That went well," she said to Yates. "Told you it would." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You have nothing to worry about. You belong here." May brought warmer weather and Nora's due date. Yates hired Helen Morrison to come stay at the ranch for a week before the baby was expected, both for company for Nora and to have an experienced woman on hand for the birth. Helen was a mother of 4, practical and unflappable, and her presence eased Nora's growing anxiety about the coming ordeal. The labor started on a warm May morning, a tightening in her belly that quickly grew into unmistakable contractions. Helen sent Billy riding for the doctor in town, though she assured Nora that first babies often took their time. Yates paced the main room like a caged animal, useless and worried, until Helen finally shooed him outside to work off his nervous energy. The labor was long and hard, lasting well into the night. Nora lost track of time, focused only on the pain and Helen's steady voice guiding her through each contraction. The doctor arrived around sunset and pronounced everything progressing normally. Yates returned after dark, haggard with worry, and Helen allowed him to come sit with Nora between contractions, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, with one last tremendous push, the baby was born. The doctor caught the infant and held it up, announcing, "It is a boy, a healthy baby boy." Nora collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure. Helen cleaned the baby quickly, bundled him in soft blankets, and placed him in Nora's arms. She looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair plastered to his small head, the miniature fingers curled into fists, and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one." Yates leaned over, looking at the baby with an expression of pure awe. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Nora asked. Yates's eyes widened. "I do not know how. I might hurt him." "You will not." She showed him how to support the baby's head, how to cradle him securely. Yates took the infant with trembling hands, holding him like he was made of glass. The baby made a soft mewling sound, and Yates looked up at Nora with wonder written all over his face. "What are we going to call him?" he asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Nora knew. "Samuel," she said. "Samuel Yates Crawford. After my grandfather and after you." "Samuel," Yates repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." The baby opened his eyes briefly, dark blue and unfocused, then yawned and fell asleep. Yates held him a while longer, then reluctantly handed him back so Nora could nurse. The doctor checked them both over, pronounced everything healthy, and departed with promises to return in a few days. Helen stayed to help Nora get settled, then tactfully retreated to the main room to give the new family privacy. "How are you feeling?" Yates asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Tired, sore, happy?" Nora looked down at Samuel, nursing contentedly at her breast. "He is really here. After everything, he is really here and healthy." "You did good," Yates said softly. He reached out and brushed a strand of sweat-dampened hair from her face. "You were so brave." "I was terrified." Brave is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. I will be right outside if you need anything." Nora dozed on and off through the morning, waking to nurse Samuel or change him or simply stare at him in wonder. Helen brought her food and checked on her regularly, helping with the baby and offering advice. Yates came in frequently, unable to stay away, always wanting to hold Samuel, to study every tiny detail of him. By afternoon, Nora was feeling stronger. Helen helped her wash and change into a clean nightgown, then tidied the room while Nora rested. When Helen finally left to return to her own family that evening, with promises to check in again the next day, Nora felt capable of managing. Yates brought her dinner on a tray and sat with her while she ate. Samuel was sleeping in a cradle that Yates had built weeks ago, placed next to the bed where Nora could reach him easily. They both kept glancing at him, still marveling at his existence. "I cannot believe he is ours," Nora said softly. "I know biologically he is not yours, but he feels like ours." "He is ours," Yates said firmly. "Blood does not make a father. Love does. I am going to raise this boy, teach him everything I know, be there for every moment I can. He is my son in every way that matters." "You are a good man, Yates Crawford." "I am trying to be the man you deserve." He took her hand. "Both of you." That night, Yates slept in the chair next to the bed, unwilling to leave them alone even though Nora assured him she would be fine. She woke several times to nurse Samuel and always found Yates awake, keeping watch, ready to help if she needed anything. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Nora recovered quickly from the birth, strong and healthy, and Samuel was a good baby, crying only when hungry or wet. Yates was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, singing tuneless lullabies that somehow always worked to soothe the baby. Billy and Helen both visited regularly, bringing meals and help and news from town. Other neighbors began to stop by as well, bringing gifts for the baby and congratulations. Nora felt herself becoming woven into the fabric of the community, making friends, establishing her place. She was no longer the desperate pregnant woman cast out by her family. She was Nora Crawford, wife and mother, respected and liked. Summer came, hot and golden. Samuel grew bigger and stronger, his dark eyes focusing on faces, his hands learning to grasp. Yates taught him to smile, spending hours making ridiculous faces until the baby laughed. Nora watched them together and felt her heart swell with love for both of them. One warm July evening, after Samuel had been put to bed and the cabin was quiet, Yates took Nora's hand and led her outside. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air sweet with the scent of summer grass. He put his arms around her, and they swayed together in a slow dance with no music but the night sounds of crickets and distant cattle. "Do you remember," Yates said quietly, "was when I first found you on that road? You were half frozen, desperate, with nothing but the clothes on your back. I remember, I thought I was going to die. I did too for a minute there. You looked like a ghost." He pulled back to look at her face in the starlight. "Look at you now, strong and healthy and happy. Look at what we have built together." "I know. Sometimes I can barely believe it is real." She reached up to touch his face. "You saved my life that day. But you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a home, a family. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it." "You saved me too," Yates said. "I did not know how lonely I was until you were here. This ranch, it was just a place I worked before. Now it is a home, because of you." He kissed her then deeply and thoroughly, and Nora felt heat bloom in her belly that had nothing to do with the summer night. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates's eyes were dark with desire. "The doctor said 6 weeks," Nora whispered. "It has been almost 8. Are you sure you're ready?" "I am sure." She took his hand and led him back inside to their bedroom. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, learning the contours of each other's bodies. Yates was gentle and patient, making sure she felt no pain, only pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweaty and satisfied, and Nora felt truly married for the first time. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I should have said it before now, but I love you, Yates." "I love you too," he murmured against her hair. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." They made love often after that, finding joy in each other's bodies, in the intimacy they had built over months of friendship and partnership. Their relationship deepened, becoming something rich and complex, built on trust and affection and genuine love. Autumn came, turning the hills gold and brown. Samuel was 5 months old now, sitting up on his own, babbling constantly, his personality emerging. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. Yates spent hours with him, teaching him to clap, to wave, to recognize the sounds of the animals. One October morning, Nora woke feeling queasy. At first, she thought perhaps she had eaten something that disagreed with her. But when the nausea continued for several days, always worst in the morning, she began to suspect the truth. She waited another week to be sure, then told Yates one evening after Samuel was asleep. "I think I might be pregnant again," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Yates's eyes widened. "Really? Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. I have the same symptoms I had before. I will know for certain in another month or so." A slow smile spread across his face. A baby. Our baby this time. Yes, ours. She bit her lip. Are you happy about it? I know Samuel is still so young. I am thrilled, Yates said, pulling her into his arms. Samuel needs a brother or sister to grow up with, and I want a house full of children if you do. I want to fill this ranch with life and noise and love. Nora laughed, relief flooding through her. I want that too. I always wanted a big family. Then we will have one. He kissed her soundly. We will need to add on to the cabin, build more bedrooms, maybe a proper parlor. You're getting ahead of yourself, Nora said, but she was smiling. Let us have this baby first, then we can plan for more. Winter came again, but this time Nora faced it from the warmth and safety of her home, surrounded by love. Samuel celebrated his first birthday in May with a small party attended by the Morrisons and a few other neighbors. He took his first steps a week later, stumbling from Yates to Nora and back again, laughing with delight. Nora's pregnancy progressed smoothly. This baby seemed easier than the first, or perhaps she simply knew what to expect now. Her body changed more quickly this time, and by the time spring arrived, she was very obviously pregnant again. The townspeople smiled and congratulated them, commenting on how fertile they were, how blessed. The baby was born in early June of 1884, another long labor but shorter than Samuel's had been. This time it was a girl, tiny and perfect, with wisps of blonde hair and eyes that would eventually turn green like her father's. Emma, Yates said, holding his daughter for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Can we call her Emma? It was my mother's name. Emma Crawford, Nora said, testing it. It is beautiful, perfect for her. Samuel, now just over a year old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, to kiss her, to bring her his toys. Yates supervised carefully, teaching him to be gentle, to help with small tasks like fetching diapers or singing to her. Life on the ranch was busy now, filled with the constant demands of two small children. Nora sometimes felt overwhelmed, but Yates was a devoted father, always ready to help, to take over when she needed a break, to share the work equally. They hired a young woman from town, Mary, to come help a few times a week, giving Nora time to rest or catch up on other work. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, Yates's herd growing larger, his reputation as a fair and honest cattleman spreading. They added on to the cabin as planned, building 2 new bedrooms and a proper parlor. Nora made the house into a real home, with curtains and rugs and small touches of beauty. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy, always at his father's heels, learning to ride and rope and handle cattle. Emma was more quiet, thoughtful, but with a core of steel that reminded Yates of her mother. They were both loved fiercely, raised with care and attention. In 1886, Nora gave birth to another son, Thomas, and 2 years after that, twin girls, Alice and Catherine. The cabin rang with children's laughter, with squabbles and games, and the constant noise of a large, happy family. One evening in the summer of 1888, Nora sat on the porch watching the sunset while Yates played with the children in the yard. Samuel was 7 now, tall for his age, teaching his younger siblings how to skip stones in the creek. Emma was 4, serious and careful, making sure everyone followed the rules. Thomas toddled after them at 2, determined to keep up, while the baby twins napped in their cradle inside. Yates came and sat beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. What are you thinking about? I was remembering that day you found me, Nora said, 5 years ago now. I was so desperate, so certain my life was over, and look at us now. I am glad I came down that road when I did, Yates said. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help you. You did more than help me. You gave me everything, a home, a name, a family, love. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I never thought I could be this happy. Neither did I. He kissed the top of her head. You know, I have been thinking. Samuel is going to start asking questions soon about where he came from, why he looks different from the other children. It was true. While Emma and the younger children had Yates's blonde hair and green eyes, Samuel had dark hair and brown eyes, taking after his biological father. So far, he had not noticed or commented, but eventually he would. "What do you want to tell him?" Nora asked. "The truth, when he is old enough to understand. That I am not his biological father, but that I chose to be his father in every way that matters. That I love him just as much as I love the others, that blood does not determine family." "You think he will understand?" "I think he will, because it is obvious how much we love him. He has never been treated differently, never been made to feel less than. That speaks louder than biology." Yates paused. "And I want him to know about you too, about how brave you were, how you survived when you had every reason to give up. He should be proud of his mother." Tears stung Nora's eyes. "You always know the right thing to say?" "I just speak the truth." He stood and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, let us go play with our children while they are still young enough to want us around." They joined the children by the creek, and the rest of the evening was filled with laughter and splashing and joy. Later, after the children were all in bed and the cabin was finally quiet, Yates and Nora made love slowly in their bedroom, whispering endearments, still finding new ways to express their love for each other. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, learning the ranch work from his father. When Yates finally told him the truth about his birth, on his 12th birthday, Samuel listened carefully and then hugged Yates tight. "You are my pa," he said firmly. "You are the only father I have ever known or ever wanted. Nothing else matters." Emma became a skilled rider, often accompanying her father on trips to move cattle or check fences. She had no interest in typical girlish pursuits, preferring to work alongside the men. Nora encouraged her, remembering her own limited options as a young woman, wanting her daughters to have choices. Thomas showed an unexpected talent for numbers and reading, and Yates arranged for him to have extra schooling, thinking perhaps he might become a lawyer or businessman someday. The twins, Alice and Catherine, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, sharing everything. In 1891, Nora gave birth to their last child, a son they named Joseph. At 30 years old, she felt this was likely her final pregnancy, and she cherished every moment of Joseph's babyhood, knowing it was the last time she would experience it. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates bought more land, expanded the herd, hired more men to help with the work. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that seemed miraculous to Nora when she remembered how close she had come to dying on that frozen road. One winter evening in 1893, 10 years almost to the day since Yates had found her, Nora stood in the parlor of their now large and comfortable home, watching her children. Samuel was 17, helping Thomas with his homework at the table. Emma was 12, playing a complicated hand game with the 8-year-old twins. Joseph, 2 now, sat on the floor with blocks, building towers and knocking them down with glee. Yates came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, Wayne?" he asked, as he had so many times over the years. "I was thinking about family," Nora said, "about how this is what I always wanted, even when I did not know it. A house full of love and noise and life." "We made something good here," Yates agreed. "Despite how it started, or maybe because of how it started, we built this together." "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked, "taking on me and Samuel? Your life would have been simpler without us." "Simpler, maybe, but infinitely poorer." He turned her in his arms, so she faced him. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Crawford, you and every one of these children. I would not change a single moment, not even the hard ones." She kissed him, a long, sweet kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership and dedication. When they pulled apart, several of the children were making exaggerated gagging sounds, and they laughed. "All right, you hooligans," Yates said, his arm still around Nora. "Time for bed. School in the morning." There was the usual chorus of protests, but eventually all the children were herded to their rooms, tucked in, kissed goodnight. Yates and Nora stood in the doorway of the twins' room, watching them whisper to each other in the darkness, and Nora felt her heart swell with gratitude. They returned to their own bedroom, the one room in the house that was theirs alone. Yates banked the fire in the fireplace while Nora changed into her nightgown. When she climbed into bed, he joined her, pulling her close against his chest. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in the line shack?" Nora asked, as you said I was starting a new life. "I remember." "You were right. But it was not just my life that started new that day. It was both of ours. We built this life together from nothing, from desperation and fear and a stranger's kindness." "Best thing I ever did," Yates murmured, already half asleep. "Stopping on that road, finding you." Nora lay awake a while longer, listening to her husband's breathing deepen into sleep, hearing the small sounds of her children settling down throughout the house. She thought about the girl she had been, cast out pregnant and penniless in the winter, certain she would die. She thought about how Yates had given her not just shelter, but a home, not just a name, but a family, not just survival, but love. Outside, the winter wind blew cold across the California hills, but inside the ranch house, everything was warm and safe and filled with love. Nora closed her eyes and let herself drift into sleep, secure in the knowledge that she had found her place in the world, that she belonged, that she was home. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, illnesses that frightened them, the normal trials of raising children and running a business. But through it all, Yates and Nora faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Samuel eventually took over more of the ranch work, becoming Yates's right hand and eventually his partner. He married a local girl, Clara, when he was 22, and they built a house on the far end of the Crawford property. When their first child was born, Samuel brought him to meet Yates and Nora, placing the baby in Yates's arms with tears in his eyes. "I want you to know," Samuel said, "that I'm going to be the kind of father you were to me. The kind who chooses to love, who shows up every day, who teaches by example. You showed me what a real man looks like, Pa, and I will never forget it." Yates, deeply moved, could only nod and hold his grandson close. That evening he told Nora, "That boy Samuel, he is my greatest accomplishment. Not the ranch, not the cattle, not the money we have made. Him, the man he became. That is what I am most proud of." Emma surprised everyone by falling in love with a teacher who came to Panamint to run the new schoolhouse. David was a gentle, educated man who supported Emma's independent spirit and never tried to force her into traditional feminine roles. They married when Emma was 19 and moved to Sacramento, where David had been offered a position at a larger school. Nora missed her daughter terribly, but was proud of her for choosing her own path. Thomas did indeed become a lawyer, going to San Francisco to study and eventually setting up practice there. He remained close to the family, visiting often, and handled all the legal matters for the ranch. The twins married brothers, causing much amusement in the family, and stayed in Panamint, their homes within easy visiting distance. Joseph, the youngest, showed early signs of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps, working the ranch and the land. As Yates and Nora grew older, their love only deepened. They were partners in every sense, sharing work and play, sorrows and joys, building a legacy that extended far beyond themselves. The ranch prospered under their careful stewardship, and the Crawford name became synonymous with integrity and hard work in the region. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Nora back to the Ridge, where he had first told her he wanted their marriage to be real. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but the love between them was as strong as ever. 20 years, Nora marveled. Looking out over the valley, it seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "Best 20 years of my life," Yates said, taking her hand. "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about how easily we could have missed each other. If I had taken a different route that day, if I'd left an hour earlier or later, if you had frozen to death before I found you. So many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other. Fate, Nora said, or providence, or just dumb luck. Whatever it was, I'm grateful for it every single day. I love you, Nora Crawford, Yates said, pulling her into his arms. I have loved you from the moment you looked up at me with those desperate, hopeful eyes. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Nora whispered. You saved my life. But more than that, you taught me how to live, how to love without fear, how to trust again, how to believe in good things. You gave me everything. They stood together on that ridge as the sun set. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful together. Below them, the ranch spread out, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Beyond that, in various homes and towns, their children were living their own lives, carrying forward the values and love they had been raised with. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, Nora reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. She had gone from being cast out, penniless and pregnant, with no hope and no future, to being a woman of means and respect, a mother and grandmother, a wife deeply loved and cherished. The transformation was almost too miraculous to believe, yet it had happened one day at a time, built on the foundation of one man's kindness and the love they had discovered together. The ranch house came into view, lights glowing warmly in the windows. Several of their grown children were visiting that evening, bringing grandchildren to see their grandparents. Nora could hear laughter and voices even before they entered, the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. Yates helped her down from her horse and pulled her close for one more kiss before they went inside. Ready to face the horde? He asked with a smile. Always, Nora replied, as long as you're beside me. They walked into the house hand in hand, greeted immediately by the joyful shouts of grandchildren running to hug them. Samuel was there with his family and Joseph with his new wife, and the twins with their husbands and various offspring. The house was indeed full of noise and life and love, exactly as Yates had promised all those years ago. As Nora stood in the middle of her crowded parlor, surrounded by the family she and Yates had created together, she felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. She caught Yates's eye across the room, and he smiled at her. That warm, loving smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Yates and Nora sat by the fire in their bedroom, content in each other's company. Nora was mending one of Joseph's shirts while Yates read the newspaper, their comfortable silence the product of decades of partnership. "Do you ever think about that first winter?" Nora asked suddenly. "About how afraid I was, how uncertain." "Sometimes," Yates admitted, setting down his paper. "Mostly, I think about how brave you were. You had lost everything, were facing impossible odds, and you still kept fighting. That is what I remember most. I did not feel brave. I felt terrified." Bravery and terror often go hand in hand. He reached over and took her hand. "You know what else I think about? I think about how lucky I am. I could have been born in any time, any place, to any family, but somehow I was born at exactly the right time and place to be on that road the day you needed someone. That seems like more than coincidence to me." "Maybe we were meant to find each other," Nora said softly. "Maybe everything that happened, both the good and the terrible, was leading us to that moment." "I like to think so." Yates stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "I like to think that somewhere, somehow, this was always how our story was supposed to go." They danced slowly in the firelight, just as they had done so many times over the years, finding comfort and joy in the simple act of being close. The fire crackled, casting warm shadows on the walls, and outside the winter wind blew. But they were safe and warm and together. As Nora rested her head against Yates's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the desperate pregnant girl on a frozen road, the cowboy who had stopped to help her. She thought about all the years between, the children born, the struggles overcome, the love that had grown and deepened until it was as much a part of her as breathing. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a home when I had none, for giving me your name when I had lost mine, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Yates replied. "Thank you for trusting me, for taking a chance on a stranger's offer. Thank you for making this house a home, for giving me children to love, for being my partner in everything. I am the lucky one, Nora. I have always been the lucky one." They held each other close, two people who had found love in the most unexpected place, who had built something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of despair. Outside, the California night was cold and dark, but inside the Crawford ranch house all was warmth and light and love. And as Nora finally drifted off to sleep that night, safe in her husband's arms, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her happy ending. Not because life was perfect or without challenges, but because she had found someone who chose to face those challenges with her, who had given her not just survival, but a life worth living, who had shown her that love, real love, was not about grand gestures, but about showing up every single day and choosing each other again and again. The story that had begun on a frozen road in the depths of winter with a desperate woman and a kind cowboy had become a love story for the ages. It was a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of love. Yates Crawford had given Nora Fletcher a home and a name, but what they had built together was so much more than that. They had built a family, a legacy, a life filled with meaning and purpose, and deep, abiding love. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.